Carl Heneghan, director of the University of Oxford Centre for Evidence-Based, say that again, Evidence-Based Medicine, there we are. You've signed this Together Declaration petition. Should the government apologise, reinstate and compensate all those poor care workers, and not just the government, the people like the Chris Whitties of this world and your Valances and all of that lot who were there, giving it large? Should they be the ones now to say sorry and compensate these poor workers who had to lose their jobs, frankly, as it's turned out, for absolutely nothing?
Well, look, one of the other things I am as well is an urgent care general practitioner, and I've gone into care homes throughout this pandemic, and I wanted to first say the people who work in this setting are amazing. Right throughout the COVID pandemic, they put themselves on the line, and often in situations where they have significant outbreaks in their care home. And if you go, what happened is on 11th of November 2021, we turned around and said, you don't have the vaccine, you don't have a job anymore. So the first thing is you say, well, look at all the effort and all the risks they put themselves to that point in time. And I think what's interesting is that you showed Alan Miller there, is it was very clear about this issue of transmission very early on. I don't understand what facts you can be looking at if you weren't understanding the major impact of this vaccine with those most at risk, the very elderly, the impact in those.
Just to clarify, Carl, sorry, I just want to make one thing very, very clear, right, which is that, so what essentially the government and the medical professionals, or at least the bigwigs who were allowed in front of the cameras, were saying was that at the height of this pandemic, when it was unknown and it was frankly absolutely terrifying, care home workers were absolutely A-OK to crack on and work in care homes where people with COVID were being sent, not even from those care homes, into other care homes. They could work, they could watch people die, they could get COVID themselves and bring it back to their families. But when they refused, for whatever personal choice that may have been, to not get the jab, they were essentially sacked, even though the people who made that jab, in the case of Pfizer, had no idea whether or not it actually reduced transmission anyway.
So one of the key aspects of healthcare is informed consent. You should be able to understand the benefits and harms of treatment. The idea that you put a mandate on people, a legal requirement to have an intervention, is a really serious issue to debate. One of the key things as well is you shouldn't have any alternative strategy at hand. Remember, and you could have been tested on the way in at the door. So you did have alternative strategies. So even ethically, it wouldn't stand up if you looked at it, the idea of a mandate. But you're right. If we look at it now, the numbers, there are 165,000 vacancies in social care. It's the largest number they've ever been. And these people were putting themselves on the line, many of them for like minimum wage. And when you look at it, they can get better wages at the supermarket these days. So the idea that we persecuted them is now looking back and saying, I'm totally in line with what Alan Miller's saying. And I think if we don't reinstate and compensate these people, we won't bring this back to the important level that being in the care sector is one of the most important jobs we need in the midst of a pandemic. And we need to look after these people who put themselves on the line each day.
Well, I'm worried about the future president. I'm worried about it because at some point in my lifetime, there'll be something else. I've been hearing about something like this my entire lifetime. It was going to be bird flu, it was going to be swine flu, it was going to be mad cow disease, it was going to be whatever the heck it was, right? And in the end, it was COVID, OK? There'll be something else before the time I'm out of it. Well, then, are we going to do the same thing again? We're just going to make people lose their livelihoods and their livings during an economic crisis, a self-inflicted economic crisis, for goodness sake. If they don't pump something into their bodies that they don't want to have. But there's a petition, isn't there, that hopefully people can sign and listen to and get things debated. What is this petition?
So the petition there is by the Tomorrow Declaration is 23,000 people have signed that so far. And it sets out this basic premise that we want the government, it's going to go to Theresa Coffey when enough people have signed it to say we want an apology to these workers. You've said about reinstating and compensating them. But I also think this also goes to a wider issue at the end of the day, which you're alluding to. This is an important issue for the inquiry, is you have to stop a few people bringing in laws that actually aren't thought through, and we as a democracy have an ability to have input to. And so that's where I think countries like Sweden had a much better legal framework than us with the Coronavirus Act, which meant people could act and within days have these rules, which actually, when you look back, it only lasted 4 months, this mandate. By 15th of March 2022, it was gone. And it went because they realised on 1st of April it was going to apply to the NHS as well. So once he started to understand it was going to be a bigger problem, then it was repealed. So we have to have mechanisms to stop a few people at government bringing in laws that actually the vast majority of us all find irreprehensible at the end of the day.
We do. And you know what, actually, Carl, I'll hold my hands up here. As a journalist, I felt very bad that it took a Dutch MEP called Rob Roos to ask a question to somebody that I think journalists should have been asking for a lot longer, which is just pretty straightforward, actually. Did you actually know whether or not, or test whether or not this jab did anything to stop transmission before it went to market? And I think it's because most people just naturally assumed, good grief, if all of the medical community and your TV doctors and all of that are coming out and saying that you need to get it so you don't kill granny, surely someone's bothered to check whether or not this thing absolutely reduces transmission. Very lastly, Carl, because I am a bit over time here, I can't help but... People say politics is like showbiz for ugly people, right? I can't help but wonder whether a lot of the TV doctors, not yourself, of course, I'm not talking about you in this, TV docs and medical professionals that normally no one had ever heard of saw their chance to have 15 minutes of fame by pumping this vaccine. And I think that's what they did. What do you reckon?
Well, look, I think it's easy to come on TV and be overcautious and pull the government line. I think what you're saying is, can you say to us, where's the evidence to make these decisions? And when you go back in time, when everybody was in restrictions, in lockdown, highly anxious, people were sent a message. And what you're seeing now is, because that's all disappeared, people are starting to ask the important questions.
Yeah.
You're also pointing out, why didn't that happen earlier? I think it's an incredibly important point. And actually, there's only a few bits of the media that have been pointing fingers, but actually it's now widening out because people are starting to open up their eyes.